The alarm inside my skull started before the doors even sealed shut, and I knew right then that something about this trial was different from anything they had thrown at us before. My name is Daniel Hale, and I was the only human standing in a line of recruits from 9 different worlds, all of us waiting to be swallowed by a chamber that had already ended 600 careers before mine. The instructor's name was Vorak, a broad-shouldered alien with plated skin that shifted colors when he spoke, and he looked at me the way a butcher looks at a piece of meat he already knows the weight of. "You are the first human to face the second trial," he said, his voice arriving through the translator half a second late, like even the machine was reluctant to repeat his words. Behind the thick glass of the observation deck, 40 other recruits pressed close, watching, some of them shaking, because they had already heard what this trial could do to a mind that was not ready for it. A pair of twins from a heavy world called Gurn stood together, their 4 eyes wide, because they had seen a friend of theirs carried out of that chamber the day before, unable to speak, unable to even remember his own name. A slender woman from a species called the Ilvek, who communicated best in silence and vibration, kept her arms wrapped around herself, because sound was something her people feared more than any weapon. Even Grace Bailey, a human recruit who had scored higher than anyone in tactical simulations, would not meet my eyes, because she had heard the same numbers I had. 600 recruits, 4 survivors, 0 who passed on the first attempt. The doors closed, and the noise began. It was not a single sound, it was every sound at once, a storm of static and shrieking frequencies that seemed to come from inside my own skull rather than from the walls around me, as if my brain itself had become the speaker. I had been warned that this was where every previous recruit had broken, some in minutes, some in mere seconds, their nervous systems overloaded by a chaos that had no pattern and no mercy. But I did not fall to my knees. I did not scream. Instead, I rolled my shoulders once, the way I used to before a long shift at a construction site back home, and I started walking. Growing up, my apartment sat 2 floors above a busy street where trucks rumbled past every night, where a neighbor practiced drums until dawn, where sirens and shouting were simply the background music of an ordinary evening. Noise to me was not an enemy. Noise was simply the sound of being alive in a crowded, loud, unpredictable world, and somehow, without meaning to, that childhood had prepared me for something no one back home ever imagined. The floor beneath me shifted without warning, gravity bending sideways, then upward, forcing my body to twist and catch itself against a wall that had just become the new floor. I planted my foot, found my balance, and kept moving, the same way I once climbed unstable scaffolding on windy mornings, with barely any sleep and far too much coffee in my system. Somewhere behind the noise, I could hear a second sound trying to hide inside it, a low pulse that repeated every few seconds, and I realized it was not random at all. It was a signal, buried beneath the chaos, guiding anyone clever enough to notice it toward the only way out. Most recruits, overwhelmed by the storm of sound, never had the chance to notice such a subtle detail, because their minds were too busy trying to survive the assault instead of studying it. But I had spent years tuning out noise that did not matter, so that I could focus on the one voice, the one sound, the one detail that actually did. I followed the pulse through 3 more shifts in gravity, my legs burning, my ears ringing, until a faint outline of light appeared, where a wall had been only seconds before. The timer on my wrist display read 8 minutes and 40 seconds when I stepped through the exit, into a silence so complete that it felt almost louder than the storm I had just escaped. Vorak stared at the readout on his console, his plated skin shifting through colors I had never seen him display before, somewhere between disbelief and something close to respect. "How," he asked slowly, "did your mind not break?" I caught my breath, feeling the ringing in my ears begin to fade, and gave him the only answer that felt true. "It was not loud enough," I said. The room stayed silent for a long moment, and then Grace Bailey, still watching from behind the glass, let out a breath she must have been holding since the doors first sealed. Word spread through the academy faster than any official report could travel, and by the next morning, everyone from the mess hall to the training yards knew that a human had walked out of the second trial, standing on his own feet. They ran the trial again that same day, not because they doubted the result, but because nobody trusted a single success against 600 failures, and I understood why. The second time, I finished in 6 minutes, moving faster now that I knew what to expect, weaving through the shifting gravity like it was simply another obstacle course from a training yard back on Earth. By the third attempt, the instructors were no longer testing whether I could survive the chamber. They were testing whether the chamber itself needed to be redesigned, because something built to break every mind had apparently met one it could not touch. A young recruit named Owen Price, who had washed out of 2 previous trials from sheer nerve alone, approached me in the corridor outside the training wing, his uniform still damp with sweat from his own attempt at a much easier exercise. "I don't understand how you did not feel it," he said, his voice low, almost embarrassed to admit his own fear. That noise felt like it was trying to tear my thoughts apart. I thought about how to explain a childhood spent surrounded by chaos, a home where silence was rare, and comfort came from learning to live inside noise, rather than fighting it. "Where I come from," I told him, "quiet was never something we were given. We had to build it ourselves, inside our own heads, whenever the world outside refused to slow down." Owen nodded slowly, though I could tell the idea still felt foreign to him, the same way stepping into that chamber without fear felt foreign to almost everyone else on this station. A senior officer named Elena Marsh, who oversaw evaluations for the entire training program, called me into her office later that week, her expression unreadable as she reviewed the data from all 3 of my attempts. "The trial was built using failure patterns collected over decades," she said, sliding a display screen toward me. "It was engineered specifically to overwhelm cognitive processing. Your species should not be able to withstand it." I looked at the numbers on the screen, seeing my own name listed above hundreds of others who had never made it past the first 2 minutes. "Maybe you built it to break minds that expected silence," I said. "We never had that luxury to begin with." Elena studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, the way someone does when a puzzle finally clicks into place, after refusing to make sense for a very long time. Within a month, the Academy had quietly redesigned the entire second trial from its foundation, adjusting frequencies, timing, and pressure levels, specifically so that it would still pose a real challenge to any human who attempted it afterward. They gave the updated version a new internal name, something the instructors used casually among themselves whenever they discussed the training schedule for incoming recruits. They called it the Hale Standard. I never asked to have my name attached to anything, and honestly, the whole idea felt strange to me, considering all I had done was walk through noise, the same way I once walked through a loud, unpredictable childhood. But months later, when new recruits arrived at the academy, nervous and unsure of what waited for them inside that chamber, I noticed something interesting happening, among the human trainees especially. They no longer feared the second trial the way recruits from other worlds still did, because word had spread that a human already proved it could be survived, and sometimes belief alone changes how a mind responds to fear. Grace Bailey went through the redesigned trial herself a few weeks later, emerging with a grin on her face despite the exhaustion clear in her eyes, telling everyone afterward that it felt less like a nightmare and more like an intense obstacle course. "It still hurt," she admitted, rubbing her temple as she caught her breath, "but it did not feel impossible anymore. Not after knowing someone already walked through it standing upright." That, I realized, was the real difference this whole experience had created, something far more valuable than any personal record or any training statistic. Fear, more than any actual danger, was often the thing that broke minds long before the real challenge even had a chance to test them, and once that fear lost its grip, everything else became something a person could actually face. Every species aboard that station had built their reputation on strength, intelligence, endurance, or precision, each proud of the specific advantage evolution had given them over countless generations. Humans, it turned out, carried a different kind of advantage, one shaped by noisy streets, crowded apartments, and a species raised inside chaos rather than protected from it. Standing in the observation deck months later, watching a new group of nervous recruits prepare to enter that same chamber, I found myself thinking about how strange it was that an ordinary, loud, chaotic childhood back home had somehow become my greatest strength out among the stars. The trial that had once broken 600 careers had become something recruits studied and trained for, rather than something they simply feared, and that shift alone felt like more of an accomplishment than any single run I had completed myself. As the doors sealed behind the newest group of trainees, and the familiar storm of noise began building inside that chamber once again, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile, because I knew exactly how this particular story would end.